glad you can join us. Here's what we have for you this Tuesday. Unruly passengers and disrupted flights. A troubling new snapshot of chaos in the cabin.
I was frustrated. We just want to get going. This is holding up our flight.
The surprising number of reports and which city has the worst behaved.
We don't need Canada product. I want to build the cars here, not in Canada.
How Donald Trump's latest threat could impact critical talks between Ottawa and Beijing.
People I know will never see again, and that's pretty tough.
Plus, remembering the creator behind Dilbert, his final message, and his controversial legacy.
CTV National News with Sandy Ronaldo.
Passengers behaving badly, from uttering threats to indecent exposure, have caused flight delays right across the country. The 2025 numbers are in from transportation authorities, and WestJet leads with the most disruptive airline passengers, with Calgary reporting the most unruly behavior. CTV's Scott Hurst delves into the incidents and how the airlines are responding. Scott.
Sandy, we're talking rage at cruising altitude and sometimes even before flights get off the ground. Canadian transportation authorities logged more than 100 reports of disruptive air passengers last year. The incidents caused numerous flights to be delayed, diverted, or turned back to the gate. In many cases, the passengers causing the disturbances were arrested or escorted off the plane by police. The 114 reports include a wide range of bad behavior, including refusing to return to a seat, vaping on board, uttering threats, assault, and indecent exposure, just to name a few. 45 of the 114 reports were filed by flights departing or arriving in Calgary, by far the most for any Canadian city. It is, as we know, a major WestJet hub, followed by Toronto with 27 reports and Vancouver with 21. In a statement, a WestJet and Sunwing spokesperson said the airlines have zero tolerance for this behavior. Air Canada tells CTV News the number of reported incidents is a small fraction of the millions of flying customers every year. The reports of bad behavior, however, are actually trending downwards over the past few years, but union reps for flight attendants tell CTV News cases of disruptive passengers often go unreported, depending on the severity of the incident, Sandy.
All right, Scott, thank you for this. So we asked CTV's Kathy Lee, who is based in Calgary, to talk to someone who has seen firsthand this kind of disruptive behavior. And Kathy, share what you learned.
Sandy, the Calgarian I spoke to says he was en route to Europe last spring with his son when their plane was diverted during a connecting flight from Montreal to Paris. Tony Martin says he was on an Air Canada 777 aircraft when an angry passenger started shouting. Martin says he believes the man was drunk and acted out while air flight attendants tried to bring the situation under control. He says eventually the pilot told passengers they needed to dump fuel in order to make an emergency landing. Once they landed, the passenger was escorted off the plane to police waiting on the tarmac. The whole ordeal caused a 4-hour delay.
I was frustrated. We just want to get going. This is holding up our flight, and it's holding up all the other 449 passengers' flights as well.
According to the Canadian transportation authorities, nearly 60% of disruptive incidents in 2025 came from WestJet flights. But an aviation expert says he doesn't believe this is indicative of a problem with WestJet, as these cases happen with many airlines.
We cannot let this get out of hand. Cannot. And we have to make sure that we basically take the action that we can in terms of, taking the force of the law and really applying it and making it public. And people ought to know, if you misbehave badly on an airplane, and these are the criteria, watch what happens.
When bad behavior causes a flight diversion, it not only puts the safety of passengers at risk, it also comes with a substantial cost. The aviation expert I spoke to says dumping fuel and diverting a plane like a 777 can cost at least $100,000. Sandy.
All right, CTV's Kathy Lee in Calgary. Thanks, Kathy. Well, Canadians have kicked off the new year with plans to make big spending cuts. A new survey found that 2/3 expect to slash budgets in preparation for a tough economic year ahead. CTV's Quebec Bureau Chief Geneviève Beauchemin now with the details of where Canadians will cut. Hi, Geneviève.
Yes, Andy, all Canadians say they're feeling the pinch, but there are generational differences at play here. This Italian grocery store and sandwich counter is whimsically called Tony Bologna.
So we make small batch every day.
On the menu at this father and son shop, a focus on best quality for the lowest price.
Just like I have families to feed, they have families to feed. So the goal was to make sure that people can feed their family at a low price, but without giving up quality. The pasta, we have it at $1.75 a bag. We make homemade tomato sauces, meat sauce, and rosé, and all the classics. So you can feed a family of four for $7 for a plate of pasta.
That hits the spot. A TD survey found 2/3 of Canadians say they plan to slash their monthly budgets by up to $1,000 a month. 55% say they'll cut on eating out, 44% on attending concerts, sporting events, movies. Many plan other belt-tightening measures like cutting down on subscriptions and fewer retail purchases. But it seems younger Canadians appear set to make more sacrifices. A whopping 86% of Gen Z say they're preparing to slash their budget. Compare that to 43% of boomers.
They're leaning in more into their loyalty programs, into budgeting, and also into no spending challenges, which are becoming very popular with this younger generation.
McDonald's is vying to tap into the budget squeeze. The fast food chain is freezing the price of some menu items for a year. For instance, $5 for the Meg Value Trio. This, as a recent study found, more than 4,000 restaurants could close this year. At Tony Bologna's, father and son say people still gotta eat, and they want to feed neighborhood families well.
So that's why we even have all the ingredients here at the low price that you could go home and do it yourself if you want to.
And we'll have to see just how long Canadians will be forced to stick to that resolution to cut back. Sandy.
All right, Genevieve, thank you. Well, the Prime Minister is heading to China after meeting with coastal First Nations in Prince Rupert. Carney's goal in British Columbia to address the pushback from Indigenous leaders who say they weren't adequately consulted on a major project. CTV's senior political correspondent Mike Lacouture is here with details of that high-stakes conversation. And Mike, coastal First Nations held a press conference this afternoon. What did they say?
Yeah, Sandy, they say their position on a pipeline has not changed one bit, and they say they will oppose any type of project that will bring tankers to the waters off the coast of northwest BC. They reiterate the fact that there is no technology out there that can clean up an oil spill in the ocean. And they say just one spill would destroy their way of life. Now, while they did thank Prime Minister Mark Carney for coming out and having the conversation with them to really meet them face to face and to have his commitment there to seek free, prior, and informed consent regarding any proposed projects, they say the answer remains no.
We're not just talking about strategic trade corridors and global trade, but this is our home. This is a responsibility for the nations to look after our territory for now and future generations.
And Mike, we also heard from the Prime Minister today. What was his message?
Yeah, ahead of the meeting, he said, look, this is about a dialogue. This is not about making any kind of big announcement. And in fact, in his readout from the Prime Minister's office, there was no mention of a pipeline, just talk about strengthening ocean protections. But there is pressure on the Prime Minister when you consider the fact that Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, who is spearheading this pipeline to the BC coast, said she is hoping to have her project submitted to the Major Projects Office by the summer, and she's looking for an approval on this project by the fall. Sandy?
All right, Mike, thank you as always. The stopover in Prince Rupert and the visit to China are linked. Mark Carney needs clarity domestically to have valuable conversations in China. It's why Saskatchewan's Scott Moe will be joining in Beijing to help push for tariff relief. Now, everyone on the trip and at home mindful of risking the ire of Canada's biggest trading partner. CTV's Abigail Beeman breaks down the issues and priorities for us. Hi, Abigail.
Sandy, automaker powerhouse Ontario does not want cheap Chinese EVs in the market. Neither does U.S. President Donald Trump, with Canadian federal government officials very sensitive to the fact that decisions made on this Beijing trip could impact the upcoming Canada-U.S. Mexico free trade talks.
The U.S. president toured a Ford factory close to our border in Detroit and gave upcoming CUSMA trade talks a shrug.
It's irrelevant to me. Canada would love it. Canada wants it. They need it. because we don't need Canada product. That's the thing. You know, I want to be a nice person, but we don't need. I want to build the cars here, not in Canada.
Donald Trump also doesn't want cheap Chinese EVs.
Thank you so much.
And flanked by Michigan lawmakers, Ontario Premier Doug Ford urged Mark Carney not to back down on Canada's 100% tariff on them during his trip to China.
It would not be good for Ontario and Canada, and it sure the heck wouldn't be good for the U.S., and it wouldn't be good when it comes to negotiating with President Trump.
Canadian government sources say to expect some progress on punishing canola tariffs, which China slapped on in retaliation for the EVs.
They've been absolutely devastating to the industry. Well, we've lost over $1 billion Canada-wide. Frankly, just even for my farm, I'm just under $100,000 myself, and that really hurts.
But with Saskatchewan's premier now joining for some Beijing meetings.
Would you take, Mo, if you didn't expect some relief, some schedule of lower tariffs on canola? Probably not.
Many are wondering if that means EV concessions are on the table.
China's being very savvy in the way that it's picked areas to tariff to pit one region of the country against another. I think premiers have been very restrained in terms of their approach on this, in terms of not trying to divide the country against itself.
In a briefing ahead of the Prime Minister's China trip, federal government sources spoke of addressing trade irritants on both sides systematically, but wouldn't discuss details of conversations around canola or EVs. Sandy?
Okay, Abigail, thank you so much. Well, a Canadian steel producer is feeling the heavy toll of Donald Trump's tariffs. Algoma Steel says it expects fourth quarter losses of $95 to $105 million. The Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario-based producer already is planning to lay off 1,000 workers. The company says those cuts would have been worse if not for $500 million in loan assistance from the federal and provincial governments. With Donald Trump's 50% tariffs on steel imports still in place, Algoma is pivoting in part to the electric arc furnace project, which the company says will position it to meet domestic demand. Now, the U.S. president says help is on the way for Iranians as he urges them to keep on protesting despite a brutal crackdown by the regime. CTV's Heather Wright has more on this and the ongoing concern from members of the diaspora. Heather.
Well, Sandy, some phone calls are beginning to get through, but internet in Iran remains cut off, leaving Canadians here increasingly worried about loved ones back home.
These are some of the images airing on Iranian state TV, which are said to show the aftermath of nationwide protests that have been met with brutal force. For the first time, authorities have given an overall death toll, 2,000 people killed, while also blaming the United States and Israel of inciting the protests.
The young one, they will participate.
Dr. Shahram Azam knows just how ruthless the Iranian regime can be. He was a doctor in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps when in 2003, the regime arrested Canadian photojournalist Zara Kazemi, who was later brought to his hospital. He says Kazemi was missing fingernails, had a broken nose, and her skull was fractured. There were also signs of rape. She later died.
There wasn't any chance it happens by accident. At least she was beaten, if not torture.
In 2005, Azam, his wife and daughter fled to Sweden and applied for asylum in Canada. In the 2 decades since he left, he's watched protests unfold in his home country, all met with brutal force. But he says these protests, happening in both big cities and small towns, feel different.
And I hope it's the end of this brutality, this regime, and these things happening to my people.
The extent of the protests and subsequent crackdowns in Iran are difficult to gauge as internet remains cut off and phone service is spotty. Protests have also spread to cities around the world, including here in Toronto, where this afternoon members of the Iranian community gathered outside the U.S. consulate. Today, U.S. President Donald Trump told protesters in Iran that help is on the way, but declined to clarify what that means.
Trump has vowed to intervene militarily on behalf of the protesters, encouraging them to keep demonstrating. While the U.S. had previously said they wanted to find a diplomatic solution, today Trump said all planned meetings with Iranian officials have been canceled. Sandy.
All right, CTV's Heather Wright. An American athlete is accusing a Canadian coach of sabotage by intentionally keeping her from qualifying for the upcoming Olympic Games. American Katie Oleander is a former world champion skeleton racer and 5-time Olympian. She says Canada withdrew some competitors from an event with crucial Olympic qualifying points on the line. By reducing the field, fewer qualification points were up for grabs. Oleander won the event, but says Canada's decision eliminated her chances of competing at the Milan Cortina Games. The Sports Canadian Federation says it is aware of the allegations, and the international governing body is launching an investigation.
To my knowledge, former President Clinton has never answered questions about Epstein.
Why both Bill and Hillary Clinton are refusing to testify despite a contempt warning. That story is coming up when we come back. The saga over the Epstein files took another turn today, involving Bill and Hillary Clinton. The former president and former Secretary of State say they will refuse to testify in a congressional investigation being led by the Republicans. The Clintons say the process is designed to land them in prison. CTV's Washington Bureau Chief Joy Malbon is following the twists and turns for us. Okay, Joy, can the Clintons just ignore a congressional subpoena?
Well, they plan to, Sandy, and they could face legal consequences. The former president was a no-show today, and his wife, Hillary Clinton, the former Secretary of State, says she, too, will refuse to comply with a congressional subpoena to testify tomorrow. In a letter, the Clintons slammed the Republican-controlled investigation into Epstein's crimes as nothing more than partisan politics, calling the subpoenas invalid and unenforceable, and a ploy to embarrass political rivals of President Donald Trump. Now, that didn't go over very well with the chairman, Republican James Comer, who said he will move to hold the Clintons in contempt of Congress. Have a listen.
One reason I think most Americans want President Clinton to answer some questions is because he visited the White House. Jeffrey Epstein visited the White House 17 times while Bill Clinton was president. No one's accusing Bill Clinton of any wrongdoing. We just have questions.
The latest release from the Trump Justice Department included many images of Bill Clinton on Jeffrey Epstein's private jet and in a swimming pool and hot tub with Epstein's accomplice, Ghislaine Maxwell. The Clintons say these are decade-old pictures that are being used to embarrass them, and their sworn testimony should be enough. Bill Clinton had a well-documented friendship with Epstein, as did President Donald Trump, but Comer says they can't compel a sitting President, Donald Trump, to testify. Sandy?
All right, Joy, thanks for this. Still ahead, when tow trucks are torched, investigating the latest suspected arson, this time caught on camera. At least 14 teenagers have been sent to hospital after a school bus rolled over on a Manitoba highway. The bus was carrying students between the ages of 16 and 18 and one adult. Police say 4 people suffered serious but non-life-threatening injuries.
Some range from spinal to stitches to broken shoulder bones and stuff like that. So it varies on injuries.
It happened about 550 kilometers northwest of Winnipeg, near the town of Swan River. Police near Toronto are investigating a case of apparent arson involving tow trucks, which took place just minutes away from another suspected arson last week. Security video from early this morning shows a suspect holding what appears to be a gas canister while walking around vehicles in a parking lot, and moments later, the cars, including 2 tow trucks, catch fire. The incident follows a similar event on January the 5th. Several tow trucks were torched. Local police say it was arson and are looking for multiple suspects. And spectacular new images of the Northern Lights show the natural phenomenon from an angle rarely seen before. The breathtaking visuals capture the aurora borealis as it hugs the edge of the Earth with colorful lights. The dazzling display was captured by a member of Japan's National Space Agency from on board NASA's International Space Station. After the break, remembering a contentious cartoonist. The life and complicated legacy of the artist who created Dilbert. The death of a controversial cartoonist and author to report today. Scott Adams, the creator of the popular comic strip Dilbert, had been battling an aggressive form of prostate cancer. He rode a wave of popularity for decades until racist comments were made about Black Americans. CTV's Adrian Gobriel on the man, his comic strip, and the legacy he leaves behind.
With comedic cynicism, it was a depiction of office culture that resonated with readers across the globe.
Luckily, everyone seems to be developing an immunity to the toxic environment.
At its height, Dilbert, the comic strip, created by Scott Adams, had its own TV series. In print, the mouthless, bespeckled character appeared in 2,000 newspapers worldwide in at least 70 countries and 25 languages. Adams once told CTV News that his own years spent working in a cubicle as an office dweller was the catalyst for his comic.
I spent 16 years in cubicles, first at a big bank and then at the phone company for 8 years. I became more cynical, if that was even possible.
Decades of Dilbert also gave way to multiple books, though the laughs came to an abrupt halt in 2023.
I got a call from my syndication company, and they said, we can't do business with you. We're done.
Adams was dropped by some of the world's largest newspapers following a racist remark he made on his YouTube show where he referenced a poll that asked people if they agree that it's okay to be white, a phrase used by white supremacists. At the time, Adams insisted his comments were taken out of context, though he made no apology.
So Dilbert is now fully canceled.
Last year, Adams revealed he had prostate cancer that had spread to his bones.
So we'll see how far we get, okay?
Just last week, Adams appeared on his live stream for what would be his final public appearance.
This is going to be a tough week.
Early Tuesday, his ex-wife appeared on Adams' live stream to share the news of his passing.
But he's not with us right anymore.
Delivering one final written message left behind by Adams himself.
I had an amazing life. I gave it everything I had. Please know, I loved you all to the very end.
Scott Adams was 68 years old. Adrian Gobriel, CTV News, Toronto.
Thank you for sharing your time with us. I'm Sandy Ronaldo. Bye for now. We'll see you Wednesday, we hope. Have a nice evening.
CTV National News, Canada's #1 newscast.